The silence in the car was the first clue. It wasn't a comfortable silence, the kind my late husband Richard and I used to share, where words were unnecessary. This was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with unspoken intentions. My son David kept his eyes glued to the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. My daughter Sarah sat beside me in the back, patting my hand with a rhythmic, mechanical motion that offered no comfort, only irritation. Her touch felt like a metronome counting down the final moments of my old life. "It's a really lovely place, Mum," Sarah said, her voice unnaturally bright. "You'll have so many activities, and people your own age. It's for the best." "For the best," David echoed from the front seat, his voice a low rumble. "For whose best?" I wanted to scream. "For yours. So you can finally get on with your lives without the inconvenient anchor of your aging mother." But the words caught in my throat, strangled by a sudden, cold wave of realization. This wasn't a discussion. This was a verdict. They had already decided my fate. The building rose before us, a modern brick and glass structure called Meadowbrook Gardens. It sounded like a paradise, but it looked like a prison. The gardens were too perfect, the flowers arranged in offensively cheerful rows, the grass a vibrant artificial green. It was a place designed to look happy, to soothe the guilt of the families who came here to discard their elderly. I didn't fight when they walked me inside. What was the point? My legs felt like lid, and a strange sense of detachment washed over me, as if I were watching a movie about some other poor, forgotten woman. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and faint despair. A perky receptionist greeted us, her smile plastered on. David did all the talking, his voice efficient and businesslike as he handed over my life in a manila folder. My medical history, my financial information, my identity, all condensed into a neat package for easy disposal. They walked me to my room. It was small, sterile, and painted a soul-crushing shade of beige. A single bed, a small dresser, a chair, and a window that overlooked a parking lot. My belongings, which they'd packed for me, were in 2 suitcases by the bed. Not my whole life, of course, just the essentials, they'd said. A few changes of clothes, some photographs they'd selected, my favorite teacup, the rest of my life, the home Richard and I had built, the furniture we'd picked out together, the garden I'd tended for 50 years, was no longer mine to access. "Well, we should get going," David announced, avoiding my eyes. "We have that long drive back and Sarah's kids have a soccer game." A soccer game? My abandonment was scheduled around a child's soccer game. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Sarah leaned in to hug me. Her perfume was expensive and overwhelming. "We'll call you tomorrow, Mum. We love you." Her words were a flimsy shield against the cruelty of her actions. Love isn't a word you say as you're walking away. It's a thing you do by staying. Then they were gone. The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed in the crushing emptiness of the room. I stood there for a long time, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. I walked over to the window and watched as their car pulled out of the parking lot. Not even a backward glance. Just like that, I was alone, a burden successfully offloaded. The first sob was a raw, guttural sound that tore from my chest. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the unfamiliar mattress stiff beneath me. I didn't just cry, I grieved. I grieved for the loss of my home, my independence, my dignity. But most of all, I grieved for the loss of the children I thought I had raised. I thought of David as a boy, his face smudged with dirt after a baseball game, running to me for a hug. I remembered staying up all night with him when he had a fever, the cool cloth on his forehead, my hand never leaving his. I'd worked double shifts at the library to help pay for his college tuition, packing his lunch every day so he could save money. He'd promised me then, "I'll always take care of you, Mum." The memory was a knife in my heart. And Sarah, my beautiful, vibrant Sarah. I remembered teaching her how to bake in our sunny yellow kitchen, her small hands covered in flour. For her wedding, a lavish affair she couldn't quite afford, I'd sold a diamond necklace my own mother had left me. "It's to build your future, darling," I'd told her, and her eyes had filled with tears of gratitude. "You've given me everything," she'd whispered. Everything. I had given them everything. My time, my energy, my savings, my dreams. I had put their needs before my own, every single day without a second thought. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was just what a mother does. I never kept a tally, never expected anything in return except their love and respect. And in the end, this is what it amounted to: a beige room in a place called Meadowbrook Gardens. As darkness fell outside my window, my grief began to curdle. The deep, aching sadness slowly burned away, leaving behind something harder, colder, anger. A white-hot rage began to simmer in my veins. They had smiled in my face while betraying me. They had used words like love and best to justify their selfishness. They had treated me not as their mother, but as a problem to be solved, an item on a to-do list to be checked off. I lay awake all night on that stiff, unfamiliar bed, the sounds of the facility a constant hum around me, the occasional cough from a neighboring room, the squeak of a nurse's shoes in the hallway, the low groan of the building's HVAC system. With every sound, my resolve hardened. They thought they had left a weak, helpless old woman here to fade away quietly. They were wrong. They had underestimated the woman who had raised them, the woman who had fought for them her entire life. Now, for the first time, I would fight for myself. The sun rose, casting a pale grey light into the room, the dawn of a new day. My eyes were dry. I had no more tears to shed for them. I sat up, my back straight, my mind clear and sharp for the first time in months. I knew exactly what I had to do. I reached for the phone on the nightstand, my hand steady. I didn't call David. I didn't call Sarah. I called my lawyer, Arthur Henderson. When his secretary answered, my voice was calm and firm. "Please tell Mr. Henderson that Eleanor Vance needs to see him. It's urgent. I'm rewriting my will." Arthur Henderson was more than just my lawyer. He was an old friend. He and Richard had played golf together for 30 years. He'd handled our estate planning when we were young and full of life, and he'd been a pillar of support when Richard passed away. When he walked into the sterile, impersonal meeting room Meadowbrook provided, his face was a mask of concern. "Eleanor," he said, his voice laced with shock as he took in my new surroundings. He took both my hands in his. "What in God's name happened? David called me last week and said you'd all decided this was the best option, that you were in agreement." "And you believed him?" I asked, my voice flat. Arthur had the grace to look ashamed. "He was very convincing. He said you were getting forgetful, that you'd had a few falls." "I tripped over the rug once, Arthur, and I'm not forgetful. I'm 80 years old. There's a difference." I pulled my hands away gently and gestured to the chair opposite me. "But that's not why I called you. I meant what I said on the phone. I want to change my will. I want to change all of it." He studied me for a long moment, his lawyerly gaze assessing my state of mind. He must have seen the iron resolve in my eyes, because he nodded slowly and pulled a legal pad from his briefcase. "All right, Eleanor, tell me what you want to do." "I want David and Sarah removed," I said, the words coming out clean and sharp, with no hesitation, "and their children. I want every mention of them, every provision struck from the document. They will inherit nothing from me. Not the house, not the investments, not a single penny. Is that understood?" Arthur's eyebrows shot up. "Eleanor, that's a drastic step. We're talking about your entire estate. It's substantial. Are you absolutely certain? If we do this, it will be very difficult to undo. It will sever your family." "My family severed itself yesterday, when they left me on this doorstep," I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. "They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. They wanted a life without me in it. They shall have it, but they will not have the fruits of my life, of Richard's and my life to fund it." He saw my determination and didn't argue further. He just picked up his pen. "Okay, Eleanor, if we're disinheriting them completely, where do you want the assets to go?" This was the part I had thought about during the long, sleepless night. My first instinct had been pure revenge. Give it all to a cat shelter, I'd thought wryly. But as the sun rose, a better idea had formed. My anger was a fire, and I could let it burn me to ash, or I could use it to forge something new. "I'm still figuring out the details," I admitted, "but I have the beginnings of a plan. The house, I want it sold. All the assets are to be liquidated and placed into a charitable trust, a foundation." I leaned forward, the idea taking shape as I spoke. "The Vance Richard and Eleanor Vance Foundation for Compassionate Care." Arthur scribbled furiously. "A foundation? What will be its purpose?" "To support people who are forgotten," I said. "To reward the people who do the jobs no one else wants to do. The caregivers, the orderlies, the nurses' aides, the ones who treat the elderly with dignity, not as an inconvenience." My mind flashed to the night before. Around 3 a.m., unable to sleep, I had pressed the call button, needing a glass of water. A young woman had appeared, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes were kind. Her name tag read Maria. She had brought me the water, and then, seeing the distress on my face, she had stayed for a moment. "First night's the hardest," she'd said softly, her voice carrying a faint accent. It gets better. You find a new rhythm. She had adjusted my pillow and given me a small, genuine smile before slipping out of the room. It was the first moment of real human kindness I'd experienced since my children's car had pulled away. There's a young aide here, I told Arthur. Her name is Maria. I want her to be the first recipient. I want to create a scholarship fund for people like her, people working in elder care, who want to advance their education, to become registered nurses or administrators. We can't fix the whole system, but we can help the good ones, the ones with heart. I also thought of the other residents I'd seen in the dining hall that morning at breakfast, the hollowed-out eyes, the vacant stares, so many of them just parked in front of a television, waiting for the day to end. And the rest of the funds, I continued, I want them to be used to create programs, not just bingo and bad movies. I want art classes, music therapy, guest lecturers. I want to fund a proper, beautiful garden where residents can put their hands in the dirt. I want to fund small, meaningful joys, a fund that provides for things the facility won't pay for, a trip to a museum, a high-quality birthday cake, a dedicated driver to take people to see their old neighborhoods one last time. Arthur had stopped writing and was just looking at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. That's quite a legacy, Eleanor. Richard would be so proud. Tears pricked my eyes for the first time that day, but they were tears of purpose, not of pain. He would, wouldn't he? I whispered. He always said your true wealth is what you give away. The following days were a blur of activity that gave me no time to wallow. I started to engage with my new reality. I sought out Maria, the night aide. I learned she was from the Philippines, sending most of her meager paycheck home to support her parents and her own young son, who she'd had to leave in her sister's care. She dreamed of becoming a pediatric nurse but could never afford the tuition. When I spoke to her, I saw not a charity case, but a reflection of my own younger self, a woman willing to sacrifice anything for her family. I also made an unlikely friend. His name was Mr. Gable, a retired history professor with a wit as sharp as a razor and a deeply cynical view of the world. He was parked in a wheelchair near the sad-looking rose bushes one afternoon, scowling at them. They call this a garden, he grumbled as I approached. I've seen more life in a jar of pickles. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. I'm Eleanor, and I agree, they need a good dose of manure. His eyes, which I had assumed were permanently set in a scowl, twinkled. A woman who's not afraid of manure. A rare breed. I'm Henry. Henry Gable became my confidant. His own children, a successful investment banker and a surgeon, lived less than an hour away but visited twice a year, on Christmas and his birthday, for a precisely scheduled 45-minute visit. He understood the particular sting of being discarded by those you have given everything to. They see us as a completed project, he told me one day as we shared a cup of bland coffee. They've graduated from our care, and now they expect us to sit quietly on a shelf like a diploma. They forget that the people who wrote the book are still living in it. I told him about my plan for the foundation. I asked if he would be willing to serve on an advisory board to help decide how the funds for resident programs were used. For the first time since I'd met him, Henry's cynical facade cracked. He looked at me, his eyes suspiciously bright. Eleanor Vance, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are a menace, a wonderful, glorious menace. It would be my absolute honor. A week after my arrival, Arthur returned with the new documents. The language was cold and legal, but the words represented a declaration of my independence. We sat in that same soulless room, but this time it felt different. It felt like my territory. I read every line, ensuring my wishes were unassailable. The creation of the Vance Foundation, the establishment of the Maria Scholarship Fund, the allocation of funds for the Meadowbrook Joy Project, to be overseen by a committee headed by Henry Gable, and the final, brutal clause. For reasons known to them, I intentionally make no provision in this will for my son David Vance or my daughter Sarah Miller, nor for their issue. They have been provided for sufficiently during my lifetime. My hand didn't shake as I picked up the pen. With a firm, steady stroke, I signed my name. It was done. I hadn't just rewritten my will. I had rewritten my future. The days after I signed the new will settled into a strange kind of peace. The burning rage had cooled, leaving not an empty void, but a quiet, solid purpose. I had taken back control. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd lost until it returned. My children's presence was replaced by their absence. A week after they'd dropped me off, Sarah called. Her voice was strained, dripping with false cheer. Hi, Mum. Just calling to see how you're settling in. Are you making friends? The question was so patronizing I almost scoffed. I'm managing just fine, Sarah. How was the soccer game? There was a brief, telling silence on the other end of the line. Oh, it was great. Liam scored a goal. So, are the activities nice? She didn't want to know how I was. She wanted to be absolved. She wanted me to say, "Oh yes, dear, you were so right, this is the best thing for me," so she could hang up and feel good about herself. I refused to give her the satisfaction. "The activities are adequate," I said coolly. "I have to go, Sarah. The book club is starting." "Oh, you joined a book club? That's wonder." I hung up before she could finish her sentence. David sent a text message a few days later, a picture of his family smiling on a boat. "Having a great weekend. Hope you're doing well. Talk soon." It was the kind of low-effort communication you send to a distant acquaintance, not the mother you just uprooted from her life. I didn't reply. What was there to say? "Glad you're enjoying the freedom. The beige walls here are very restful." Their silence was a language in itself. It said, "We did our part. The difficult task is over. Now please be a good mother and fade quietly into the background." They were counting on my passivity. They were counting on the old me. They had no idea she was gone. Meanwhile, I was building a new life from the ashes of the old one. My friendship with Henry blossomed. He was gruff and curmudgeonly on the outside, but underneath he had a brilliant mind and a tender heart. We discovered a shared love for poetry and history. We'd sit in the sad little garden, and he'd recite Walt Whitman from memory, his voice booming and full of life, startling the other residents from their afternoon stupor. With the seed money I'd advanced from my personal account to get things started, the Meadowbrook Joy Project took its first tentative steps. Henry, as chairman, was a man reborn. He organized a meeting with the facility director, a harried woman named Mrs. Peterson, who was used to dealing with complaints, not proactive residents with a budget. When Henry and I laid out our plan, a guest lecturer from the local university, a classical music quartet, a bus trip to the art museum, she looked at us as if we'd grown second heads. That's because you've never offered them anything better," Henry retorted, his eyes flashing. "We're not content. We are merely resigned. There's a world of difference." The first event was a lecture by a retired astronomy professor on the constellations. We expected a handful of people to show up. Instead, the common room was nearly full. People I'd only ever seen slumped in their chairs were sitting up, their eyes wide with wonder as the professor showed slides of nebulas and galaxies. For an hour, we weren't just old people in a nursing home, we were explorers of the cosmos. It was a resounding success. My connection with Maria deepened as well. I learnt the details of her life story, the village she came from, the son she missed with a physical ache, the dream she held onto like a secret treasure. I told her about the scholarship I was establishing. At first, she didn't understand. "For me?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "But why?" "Because kindness should be rewarded, Maria," I told her gently. "Because you treat people here like they are still people. That's a rare gift. I want you to have the future you deserve." She wept, her tears falling freely. They weren't tears of pity, but of overwhelming gratitude. She hugged me tightly, and in that embrace, I felt a more genuine familial connection than I had in years. It wasn't an obligation, it was real. One afternoon, I was sorting through the small box of photographs my children had packed for me. There was one of the four of us, David, Sarah, Richard and me, at a beach house we'd rented years ago. We were all smiling, Richard's arm around my shoulder, the children young and full of promise. A sharp, unexpected pang of grief hit me. For a fleeting moment, I missed them. I missed the family I thought we were. I felt a wave of doubt. Was I being too harsh? Was this act of disinheritance born of spite rather than justice? Could there be a way back? I took the photo with me when I met Henry for our daily coffee. I showed it to him, my hand trembling slightly. I had a moment of weakness, I confessed. He looked at the photo, then at my face. A moment in time. It's not the reality you're living in now. The people in that picture grew up and made choices. They chose to betray the woman who gave them that happy memory. He pointed a gnarled finger at the smiling faces of my children. Their love came with terms and conditions. It was valid only as long as you were useful and convenient. The moment you became a responsibility, the contract was voided. What you are doing is not spite. It is simply enforcing the terms of their own agreement. They don't get to have the benefits of the family they chose to shatter. His words were a splash of cold, clear water. He was right. My love for them had been unconditional. Theirs for me was not. My decision wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about honoring my own worth. It was about ensuring that the life Richard and I had worked so hard to build would stand for something meaningful, for compassion, for dignity, for the kind of love that doesn't walk away when things get hard. I put the photograph back in its box and never looked at it again. A month after my arrival, an official-looking letter arrived for me. It was from David. I opened it with a steady hand. It was a bill. He had charged me for the movers, the gas for the drive, and a management fee for his time spent organizing my transition. He had deducted it from my monthly pension, which was still being deposited into our old joint account, an oversight I would have Arthur rectify immediately. I stared at the itemized list, at the cold, hard numbers that quantified my own abandonment, and I laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound, but it was a laugh nonetheless. They truly felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse. To them, this was all just business. The letter was the final confirmation I needed. My doubt vanished completely, replaced by a cold, resolute certainty. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had won. They thought they had gotten away with it. The storm was gathering, and they were sunbathing on the beach, completely oblivious, and I would let them. I would wait until they came to me, wallets open, expecting to collect the final payment on their investment. Only then would they understand the true price of what they had done. Another month passed. The first Joy Project checks were cut. A brand new upright piano was delivered to the common room. Maria received her first scholarship payment and enrolled in night classes at the local community college. The garden began to transform under the care of a professional landscaper, with raised beds being installed so residents in wheelchairs could participate. Life at Meadowbrook was changing. I was changing. I felt lighter. Then, the inevitable happened. Sarah called, her voice a little too casual. "Hi, Mom. So David and I were thinking, we haven't seen you in a while, and we'd love to come visit this Saturday. We could take you out for lunch." The offer was an olive branch, but I knew it was rotten to the core. They weren't coming to see me. They were coming to check on their investment. Perhaps a guilty conscience had finally pricked them, or more likely, they felt they needed to put in some face time to ensure their inheritance was secure. "Take me out," I replied, my voice neutral. "That won't be necessary. You can visit me here. We can have coffee in the common room. It's been redecorated." "Oh, okay, sure," she said, a hint of disappointment in her voice. A public meeting was not what she'd had in mind. It's harder to have a difficult emotional conversation when strangers are watching. That was precisely the point. "We'll see you Saturday around noon then." On Saturday morning, I dressed with care. I chose a simple but elegant navy blue dress, the one Richard had always loved. I wore the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. I wanted to look like Eleanor Vance, not some nameless, frail resident. I was not a victim. I was the master of my own fate. I asked Maria to help me down to the common room a little early. The new piano gleamed in the corner. Bright, colorful paintings from the new art class adorned the walls. The room was filled with flowers from our new garden. It no longer smelled of disinfectant, but of fresh blossoms and coffee. I sat in a comfortable armchair facing the door, a small table beside me. On the table was my purse, and inside it, 2 envelopes. Henry sat across the room, pretending to read a newspaper, but his eyes were watchful. He was my silent guardian. At precisely 12:15 they arrived, fashionably late. David was wearing a polo shirt with a country club logo, and Sarah was in a designer sundress. They were a portrait of suburban success. They both carried small generic gift bags. "Mom," Sarah chirped, bending to kiss the air beside my cheek. "You look wonderful. See, this place is agreeing with you." "Hello, Sarah." "David," I said calmly, my hands resting in my lap. They sat on the sofa opposite me, looking slightly uncomfortable in the newly vibrant room. They were used to the old, dreary atmosphere. "We brought you some things," David said, pushing the gift bags forward. One contained luxury hand lotion, the other a box of expensive chocolates, gifts for a stranger. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful," I said, leaving the bags on the table. An awkward silence fell. They launched into a frantic monologue about their lives. Sarah's kitchen remodel was almost complete. David's son, my grandson, had made the varsity golf team. It was a performance, a desperate attempt to wallpaper over the gaping hole of their neglect with cheerful, mundane chatter. I let them talk for 10 minutes. I listened, my expression unreadable, as they detailed their busy, important lives they were able to lead, in part, because they had outsourced my care. Finally, David seemed to run out of steam. He leaned forward, adopting a serious man-to-man tone. "Look, Mom, we know the transition was a little abrupt. We've been meaning to talk to you about your finances, just to make sure everything is in order. With you being here, it might be simpler if I took over as your power of attorney, just to handle the bills and manage the estate. It would take all that stress off your shoulders." There it was, the real reason for their visit, the gentle, concerned takeover. They weren't just checking on their inheritance, they were trying to seize control of it now. I looked from my son's earnest, greedy face to my daughter's hopeful one. The last vestiges of my maternal affection withered and died. I smiled. It was a calm, serene smile. It completely unnerved them. "That won't be necessary, David," I said softly. "My affairs are perfectly in order. In fact, I've made some changes recently. And I agree, it's important we're all on the same page. That's why I have something for you." I reached into my purse and pulled out the 2 envelopes. I handed one to David and one to Sarah. Their names were written on the front in my neatest script. They exchanged a confused look. "What's this?" Sarah asked. "A copy of my new last will and testament," I said, my voice as clear and steady as a bell. "Or rather, a summary of it, prepared by my lawyer. I thought you should be aware of the arrangements I've made." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The air grew cold. David tore his envelope open with an impatient rip. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened hers. I watched their faces as they read. I saw the exact moment the words registered. I saw the confusion morph into disbelief, then into pure, unadulterated shock. Sarah's face went white, the color draining from her cheeks as if she'd seen a ghost. David's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching violently in his cheek. He looked up from the paper, his eyes blazing with fury. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "This is a joke, right?" "I assure you, it's no joke," I said calmly. "It is a legally binding document, signed and witnessed. You're disinheriting us." Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked utterly broken, but not by the loss of her mother's love, by the loss of her mother's money. "Everything? The house? You're giving it all away to the help." "I'm not giving it to the help, Sarah," I corrected her gently. "I am leaving my estate to the Vance Foundation for Compassionate Care. Its first act will be to provide an educational scholarship to a young woman named Maria, who has shown me more kindness in 2 months than my own children have in 2 years. Its second act will be to fund programs that bring joy and dignity to the residents here, overseen by my dear friend Mr. Gable." Henry lowered his newspaper, a grimly satisfied look on his face. "You can't do this," David exploded, rising to his feet. He waved the paper in his hand. "You're not in your right mind, you're being manipulated. We'll contest this, we'll have you declared incompetent." "Will you?" I asked, meeting his gaze without flinching. "My lawyer, Arthur Henderson, whom you know well, can attest to my soundness of mind. As can my friend Henry, a retired professor. As can my doctor, who will attest to yours, I wonder. The children who dumped their mother in a home and sent her a bill for their services. I imagine a judge would find that very interesting." Sarah started to cry, her sobs ugly and theatrical. "How could you do this to us? To your own family, after everything we've done for you?" The sheer audacity of that question finally broke through my composure. "Everything you've done for me?" I said, my voice rising for the first time, sharp with the pain of 1,000 betrayals. "Let's talk about what you've done. You brought me here to this place, not for my own good, but for your convenience. You smiled and told me you loved me while you were abandoning me. You packed up a few of my memories in a suitcase and assumed control of the rest of my life. You didn't want me. You wanted my house. You wanted my savings. You wanted the inheritance that you saw as your right. You just didn't want the woman who came with it. I stood up, my small frame filled with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I looked at my two children, my two successful, beautiful, hollow children. You were right about one thing, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, devastating finality. It is better for me here, but not for the reasons you think. It's better because here, I learned the difference between a family of obligation and a family of the heart. I have found people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. You made your choice the day you left me here. Now you get to live with it. I know I will. I turned, without another word, and walked away. I walked over to the piano, where Maria had just sat down to practice a simple piece for her music theory class. I placed my hand on her shoulder. She looked up and smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile. Behind me I could hear Sarah's weeping and David's furious, impotent whispers. But I didn't look back. I was looking forward to the future I had made for myself. The sound of the piano, hesitant but hopeful, filled the room, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly at home.